Kaitlyn.
Hello, Emily. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Kaitlyn Foster. Luca is how old now?
15 months.
15 months.
Yeah, it's crazy. Time really does go fast.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels like just yesterday he was born. Like sometimes I think back and it's just yesterday. And other days it feels like an entire lifetime has gone by.
Yeah. I still like looking. Sometimes I'll look at Bjorn's, like the day he was born, like all his like newborn photos. I'm like, oh my
Yes.
God.
It's so cute. I know I love to look back at the photos and I can't believe how tiny he was.
Aw.
Now he's a full-on toddler. Like we're
Yeah.
full-on toddler.
15 months. And you live in Charlotte.
Yes, Charlotte, North Carolina. So when I got pregnant, it was a surprise. My husband and I weren't married yet. We wanted to like have this long engagement and then this long time with no kids of getting our life together. That didn't happen. I got pregnant and of course, with practicing FAM, you can only get pregnant like a few days of the month. And then I had made like one mistake with not with my tracking, but with like my behavior, you could say. So I just messed up one time and I was like, oh, it's only one time. What's the chance? Right?
Yeah. So what you're doing, you're taking your temperature in the morning and the whole thing.
Cervical mucus, sensation, like the whole thing. I had worked with a FAM coach who taught me the fertility awareness method. And it was great for learning, like getting my cycle back in like a healthy track because I had taken birth control for a lot of my life in my 20s. And I discontinued it maybe 3 years before I got pregnant. So I was very aware of my dates and the timing. So I knew because I had had unprotected sex in the window I shouldn't have. And I knew that. And then I knew I was pregnant long before I took the test. I just like one day I looked in the mirror and I'd been feeling off, but I thought I was tired from working. And I looked in the mirror and I was like, inside I just heard like, you're pregnant. And I was like, oh, I'm pregnant. And then I did take a test. I went and I got just a test from the drugstore and I used that. And then I knew I was pregnant. So I just put it down and left and then came back and I was like, oh, yeah, it's positive. And then I wanted to, of course, like tell my now husband. So I took 5 more, just so I could take a bunch. Because the weirdest thing for me, Emily, is like the doubt entered my mind after I took the test and I had the positive test. I don't know why, because I was so sure. And then I took it and then I was like, wait, but like the test could be wrong. And it's so strange that the test is what brought doubt in my mind. So anyways, I took like 5 and then he came over and I sat him on the couch and he was like, what is wrong with you? And
here's all the evidence.
That's what I did. I was like, I'm pregnant. And I passed him the bag of tests because I didn't want like him to be like, what? Because you know how it's so shocking. I didn't want that. So I was like, here you go. Anyways, so it was a surprise. It was a happy surprise. And at the time I was working in pediatric cardiology. And prior to that, I had worked as a neonatal nurse in the NICU. So I had a lot of negative experiences and memories surrounding birth because part of the thing that I would do as a NICU nurse is go to the resuscitations for the babies who came out and they were really not doing well. And when they call the NICU team, it's usually they're really not doing well. So it's uncommon that you walk into like a nice situation where baby is born and gets to be with mom and it's nice. In my experience, it was either the baby is truly compromised or is not truly compromised, but because of the hospital setting, we treat the baby and mom, like we assume that there's a problem and take the baby from the mom when really we could have waited it out and it would be okay. Does that make sense? How it's like, I saw these 2 very different scenarios, but both quite traumatizing and not like a nice story of birth.
Yeah. Well, because in a hospital birth, when a baby is born, where does it go immediately?
To the warmer usually.
Okay.
So they say that they try to like put the baby on the chest of the mom, but in my experience, to have them put the baby on the chest and delay cutting the cord, the baby has to be doing like pink and screaming pretty much instantly. There is a timer you're supposed to set and watch for the oxygen saturations and give the baby time, because they know that people are stressed when the baby comes out and prematurely act to make the baby breathe, when really the oxygen saturation, we should wait. However, it's rare that this happens, especially in a situation where the NICU team has been called. So usually they just like cut the cord, pass the baby to this warmer. It's like I'm sure you've seen it. It's just like a raised platform with a heat lamp. And then that's where the baby goes. And we like do stuff to the baby, but because of the convenience factor, we have to cut the cord and separate baby from mom, because there's no room for like all of the practitioners and the doctor to be around the baby. And
well, we know that could definitely help keeping the baby attached.
And the justification for this is the baby needs to breathe because it's out, which to me always made me raise my eyebrows, because the cord was still attached and still pulsing, but we cut it. So we cut where the baby could breathe. So yeah, you have created an emergency. The baby no longer has any way to breathe. So then they need the doctors to be at the airway, like taking care of the baby's airway. And that's the justification. So I had this all in my head, of course, when I got pregnant. And it was during this time of lockdown in the hospital because of the concern for COVID. So when I originally got pregnant, there was a local community hospital. I was very much in the medical model. You get pregnant, you call, you do the things. So I called them and I said, like, I'm pregnant. I would like to schedule an appointment and see the team to like schedule my birth, whatever. And so they're like, okay, you can't schedule an appointment until you've had an ultrasound. And I was like, oh, why do I need an ultrasound? And they said, because we have to know how pregnant you are. And I was like, oh, don't worry. I'm sure. Like, I tracked my cycle. I know I'm 5 weeks. Like, I was sure that I was 5 weeks. And they're like, it doesn't matter. You have to have the ultrasound. I was like, interesting. Okay.
I was just doing some more research on ultrasounds, and having an ultrasound early on is something that is completely not necessary.
No. And interestingly enough, it is the only ultrasound that's decently accurate, to give credit where it is due. Like, it's decently accurate. They're pretty good at telling the dates, but I'm telling them I know my dates. And there's already this like total mistrust in me as a woman that I know how pregnant I am, right? So they're like, no, there's no way you know. I'm like, no, I know. I can show the doctor my thing. Like, I know. No, you can't get an appointment until you schedule it. I was like, okay. So I schedule it. And then I'm like, okay, so my husband can come, or my like partner at the time, we weren't married yet. And they're like, well, no, because of COVID. I was like, what? Okay. So I hung up the phone and just was thinking, okay, this is not for me. I need another option. So I called I asked around, and I found a CNM in town, because in Virginia, certified nurse midwives can practice. They practice independently and do home birth. So it was just her in her own practice, and she did home birth. So I called her for an appointment and said, like, I would like an appointment. I don't need an ultrasound. I know my dates. And she said, okay, yeah, of course, you know your dates. No problem. Just come for the first appointment. And I was like, okay, this is attractive. Like, she's respecting my choice. I was like, okay, can my husband come? And she's like, yes, he can come. No problem. And so we both were able to go. I was like, great. And I scheduled that, and I canceled my other appointment with the hospital. Even this, in the setting that I was, felt so like radical, because home birth is very frowned upon within the hospital community. So for example, I was talking to my supervisor, who, get this, is a midwife by training. And I told her my plan. I was like, actually, I want to have a home birth. And I told her I was pregnant because we have a great relationship. And she was like, well, just don't tell anyone else, but I support you behind the scenes.
Wow.
So she couldn't even say, like, she's a midwife by training. She worked in California and doing home birth, and she couldn't even support me publicly in the setting that I worked. So what I decided is I told the people closest to me what my plan was. And my colleagues on the periphery, I just didn't mention it, because they don't ask. People assume that you're just having hospital birth. You don't have to explain. The only people that ask are, close friends and family, because they're like, oh, where are you having the baby? So that's how we did that. And then I didn't do the first ultrasound. We went to the appointment with her, and I didn't like love her as a person. We didn't click. I wasn't like, oh, we're friends. Like we'd be friends. No, but she did respect my decisions. So when it came time for the anatomy scan, I declined it. And it was
what was her justification to do an anatomy scan?
She said she feels they're mostly accurate with the 4D technology. And most of her clients, these are her words of justification, choose to do it just to see if the baby has, for example, like a cleft palate. She said a lot of people emotionally can't deal with it at birth if they didn't know about it. But I asked her and I was like, oh, but from what I understand, it doesn't catch all of them. And it could cause like unnecessary worry. And she's like, yeah. So she said she does recommend that I do it. But when I had said I wasn't going to, she dropped it. And she was like, okay. So that was a positive experience because I just wanted someone who respected my choice. I didn't need to be like her best friend, right? So I was like, okay, great. And then, so we continued on with the prenatal care, which was, just going to her, honestly, like, no, you just go and she's like, oh, you're good. Like, are you stressed? How are you feeling? And we were trying to find a place to live at the time because our one lease was ending and the other was not started yet, like before we moved to North Carolina. So we're looking at Airbnbs, and I was at first telling people like, oh, I'm looking for an Airbnb, and just so you know, I'm having a home birth. And they got so weird and they would stop responding, and we couldn't find anywhere to rent. So eventually I just stopped mentioning it. And I thought, okay, I'm going to tell them I'm pregnant. There's going to be a new baby. And if they ask where I'm having the baby, I tell them. If they don't, I don't.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that is ethically, but it's how I decided to navigate it in the end. So the couple we ended up renting from, because I was like determined to have this home birth. I didn't care if we needed to, we were going to just like go to my mom's basement or something. It was fine. So that was my backup. So we ended up finding a place with a couple that lived upstairs, and they didn't ask like where I was planning to have the baby. They just assumed like she works at UVA. She's having the baby at UVA. We live down the street. No problem. Needless to say, I told her later, we're really good friends. It was hilarious. It was so funny, but it was fine.
Yeah, I feel like either way, it's your business.
Yeah.
I feel like it's the same as like, by the way, we're going to have sex here. You know what I mean? Like that's
yes,
you wouldn't say that.
The example that my midwife used, she's like, you don't have to tell them, like some people rent hotel rooms. And I was like, that's such a good idea. Like, I'll just do that. But I felt like this obligation to be fully transparent in a way that really probably wasn't necessary. And in the end, it worked out fine. So we continued through my prenatal care, and it's like you mentioned, I started doing some research on ultrasounds, and I just found that there was really not a solid justification for one. So the biggest like soul searching for me was around the ultrasound, because having worked in the NICU, I had seen those very rare cases where something at birth, if not picked up on the ultrasound and birthed at home, was likely deadly. And that is so rare.
Is one of them if the intestines are on the outside?
No, okay. I was comfortable with that at home. Okay. So in my opinion, if that happens at home, you simply use like sterile water or boiled water on gauze, cover it up, put some saran wrap, and you would transfer. If you're born with like something called a diaphragmatic hernia, it's like a defect in the diaphragm. It's a true emergency, and without medical intervention, the baby would likely not make the transfer because you can't get air in the lungs without blowing up the stomach. So I did have this one real scenario, because we talk a lot about the safety of home birth in the community we're in. And the reality is it is safer, even statistically and study-wise. And we just know it's safer in our bones from like being women. Like we know that we can do this. But I did, of course, have this intellectual knowledge that there is like one scenario that if not in the hospital, it was risky. But I chose to go. I truly felt that my baby was fine. I didn't need anyone to tell me. I was like, no, I know he's okay. And if he wasn't okay, I would know and I would transfer care. I could tell I knew. So we stayed home and she didn't done ultrasound. And then time went by, I became more confident in my choice to birth at home. And it came time to like, I was 38 weeks and 1 day. And of course, just like the movies, my water broke.
But
everywhere.
before this, during this, how much research were you doing? Were you reading Gentle Birth, Gentle Mothering? Were you just, Googling stuff?
I was listening to podcasts.
Okay.
That was my main thing. And then I downloaded the Free Birth Society's birth affirmations and I took a hypnobirthing class. I'm glad you asked this. So I took a hypnobirthing class, which I found very helpful for the breathing techniques, the affirmations, the relaxation, and kind of like the reframing of birth. Recently, I don't know if you've thought about this, there's criticism of hypnobirthing saying that it's just trying to get women to like sedate themselves during labor and not truly, they don't want them like screaming and things like that. They're like, oh, it's just trying to sedate and pacify them. So it's not, it's getting you out of your body instead of into it.
Yeah, I've seen posts like that. So what are your thoughts on that, having taken hypnobirthing?
I think you could completely use it like that to kind of disconnect. But for me, it helped me connect more because I focused on the affirmations and the breathing. And I had done a lot of yoga. So I practiced Ashtanga yoga throughout my pregnancy. And that helped me like connect with what was going on in my body. So for me, the hypnobirthing was very helpful. And I would recommend it, especially to people who haven't had a yoga practice or something where they're like, know how to like connect and get through something difficult without disassociating. But you could use it to disassociate. Like you could just use it to not feel. I used it the opposite. So for me, it was helpful. What do you think about it? Did you look into it at all?
I didn't, but I feel like tuning into your breath, learning anything to help you if you've never done it could be helpful. Why not?
Yeah, for me, it was very helpful.
Yeah.
I had the attitude of like, the more I know, the better. So I did that. And then my husband and I took together a class that was like a pelvic PT did the class. And it was more sort of like hospital-ish focused. But she did teach the husband some different ways, to like press your back if you want a back massage or some counter pressure. We ended up using like none of the techniques, but it made him feel confident going into it. He appreciated that. He could not stand the hypnobirthing class. He was like, this is so weird. He did not like it.
Did he go to every class? How many are there?
Yeah. The one I did is like required. It was several months, like 4 months. And they have like every other week, the partner comes.
Okay.
Yeah. But they do teach a breathing technique called J breathing, which helps you like not contract in between pushing so the baby doesn't like pop back up. It was super helpful when it came to pushing, but it was a really helpful technique. And of course, we're taking the class and he's like, I did like this class. You can poop really fast. So he was like, so he did enjoy some of the techniques they taught. It was so funny. So the husbands were all joking in that class that it was like the one that they liked. But it's the J breathing and it is really helpful.
Can you share with me? Because actually happened. Cody was saying Bjorn was retreating and what's the breathing? What do you do?
Like, okay, I might not do it justice because it's been a year since I took it. But what I remember is you like breathe in during the contraction and you like count a quick 15 and you figure out how many breath counts you need for your body. So you're like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15, and you're breathing in. And then you breathe out and you imagine like a J going out and down and the baby going down. And then you do it again right after. So you're trying to like get through the contractions and not push. And then, because if you push down, instead of just breathing down the baby kind of pops back up instead of like slowly coming down. So you just try to keep relaxed. And then for me, it was helpful. Like I could feel when the baby started to come back up and I would just say like, be like, relax, relax, relax. And then his head would not pop back up. It was so helpful. And I wouldn't even say I pushed. I don't know. It just like, it was a very helpful technique. Yeah. Cause I didn't experience that. Like you said, when, especially first time moms, the baby keeps coming down and then back and down and then back. I felt it happen once, and then I realized like, okay, I need to adjust my muscles here. So it stopped happening. And he just like stayed, and then he flew out.
Wow. Okay.
So
Well, I
no.
can't wait to get into it.
You
Okay.
should definitely, if anyone who's listening and like getting ready to give birth, it's worth even just Google it and like find a few exercises on that specific breathing technique. I found it very helpful because they connect it with meditation and imagining like a hot air balloon and imagining unraveling like a rose flower for your cervix. So it is very much like mind body connection if you let it. And you don't use it to like disassociate. You can like really connect to your body and like feel your cervix opening. It's very cool. It was very helpful. So
Well,
I
what
did
does
the
it mean? What does it mean with when the baby goes in and out? I mean, like, is that
It's fine. And honestly, like in retrospect, I wonder if you let that happen, maybe you're less likely to tear. I've heard that argument because then the baby's going in and out. And I didn't have a tear in my perineum. I had a tear on my labia because he flew out.
Yeah.
Like, so I could feel it when it happened. But if you if the baby went in and out, maybe you're less likely to tear. People say then you're like slowly stretching.
Okay, that didn't happen with me. I tore.
It's like,
Yeah.
And then the other thing is there's my view around tearing was never something I was worried about, but it's a huge concern for women. But for me, I think we're designed to heal. So I think it's okay if you tear. And I know that's not what people want to hear really, but it just happens and it's okay. It's a mucous membrane. Like you heal so fast and it's not necessarily comfortable. Like it doesn't feel great to tear. I knew it was the one, I wouldn't even consider labor painful, but when my labia tore, it was very painful. Like, like a fire burning, like tear. But I don't think tearing should be considered bad. And I think
Not at all.
bad, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. I could see how it's a concern because it's your muscle, your membrane tear. It's a part of your body that's tearing.
like,
At
I
the
don't
same
want to
time,
tear.
yeah, but it's a beautiful scar. We're going through something that's huge. Like, the Tony Robbins where they run across the fire. Like you're going to get some burns on your feet. Do you care about that? I mean, I don't know if that's but you go into it knowing that you're going to be doing this amazing thing. Yeah. And you don't really think about, your feet getting blisters and stuff.
Right. And I think the other huge thing to differentiate for women planning their birth is like the tears that we're talking about happen in a natural environment naturally. These aren't tears because someone stuck forceps up your vagina. So there's a true fear of tears that I think is incredibly valid because the tears that women have can be crippling from birth, but usually that's in a very different environment that has a lot of over interventions and their tears not caused by these severe tears are not caused by the baby coming out in the position that the woman wants. They're caused when there's like literally things going up your vagina when something should be coming out, even if it's fingers, like saying, this is how you push. Yeah, you're going to tear. There's something else there plus baby's head.
Yeah. Even coached pushing.
Yeah, no, that's like, I can't even imagine having someone tell me when to push after experiencing the physiological urge of just like bearing down and letting my baby out. I cannot imagine if I was trying to control that reflex, it would be torture. It would be incredibly painful. Like,
yeah, I've definitely heard stories how it is torture. Yeah. So, and do you tell your family about the home birth? But we can go.
One last thing I meant to mention for preparation that I loved was this book called Labor Like a Goddess. Have you ever heard of it?
Oh,
it's fabulous. 2 doulas wrote it, and it talks about doing shadow work in your pregnancy and making sure that you walk through the quote unquote gates. It's a story of a maiden walking through the gates of preparation for birth. So she has to go through different gates, for example, shame. And in the shame gate, she has to give up her clothes and be naked. So it's a little bit like cheesy, but if you do it and you do the shadow work prior, I believe it led to an easeful birth. So I really have done a lot of shadow work and been through a lot of crap in my life. And I knew exactly who I was going into this. So I was ready in terms of the emotional and spiritual, which I personally think was incredibly valuable. So more than the physical aspect of being ready to give birth physically. So it's called Labor Like a Goddess and it's awesome.
It reminds me of the story of, in the book that I'm reading called Maiden to Mother. It reminds
Similar.
me of the Descent of Inanna, the story.
Yes. She goes into the underworld. I bet that's what
Yeah.
they use as inspiration.
It's a beautiful story.
It's awesome. So that was really helpful for me. So I'm of the thing is like, you can't know enough. Go ahead and get prepared. You can't know enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was wonderful. And do the shadow work, like whatever you want to call it. Deal with your mom issues, like do the shadow work before, because if you don't, it will get you in labor in some way. Like you can't run then. You can run in pregnancy, but you can't run in labor because you have to go through. Like there's no way to get your baby out otherwise.
Yeah. And I feel like pregnancy is a time to go inward.
Yeah. Because your intuition is turned on. You're really like tuned into your body naturally. And then in labor, that just amplifies because your like thinking brain shuts off and you really have a chance to like drop in if you choose to. Yeah. So that was the last thing I did in preparation. And it was probably the most helpful.
That's amazing. Yeah. You sharing that you wanted to have a home birth with your family, with your in-laws. How was that?
Interesting. um, I got a lot of different responses. And in the beginning, they bothered me because I wasn't okay with the decision yet. And by the time I was, they didn't bother me. So I would like mention it. And usually the first reaction was, I have a cousin, her baby died. So they all had these very poignant memories of like what could possibly go wrong. And I understand that. And I finally realized it was, nothing to do with my decision. And it was just about their story. And the people that were the most concerned and adamant that I should change my plan were interestingly like not the people that would take care of my baby if something really happened. They were, they would not show up at my door if I had a baby who was devastated from a birth injury. Nope. Those people were actually more accepting, like, my mom, my close friends. And they were also women who, just in my experience, had birth experiences and motherhood and mothered in a way informed by their experience that I did not want to do. Like I did not want that life. So I finally realized, why would I take their advice? And why would I even listen? Because I don't want their story. So to stop taking the advice of people that I didn't want their story was a huge turning point for me. And like tuning into the women like, oh, that's the birth story I want. So what did she do? And I tried to focus on that, and that was really helpful. The hardest was with my mom because she was a labor and delivery nurse forever. And I had joked with her and my husband that I wanted like just a free birth. Like I was like, can I just be you guys? Like we don't need the midwife and as it like a joke, because it was so in the periphery of my mind, right? Like being so in the medical world, this was like, it was so, I knew it was possible subconsciously because I like said this as a joke, but I didn't have the guts or I hadn't done the work to really be like, no, I'm doing this now, be there or don't. But I did have that confidence having the midwife. So I just told her, I was like, well, I told both of them and my husband, I'm like, well, you need to figure out what your darkest fear is in this. And my husband's was, of course, losing me and being stuck with a baby. He's like, I'd be screwed if I had a baby and you weren't here. And I was like, yeah, so deal with that. And if you can't deal with that, let me know because I'll hire a doula and you don't need to be there. And same with my mom. So they both did the best they could and they showed up and they really supported me in an amazing way. They were not happy that the midwife didn't show up, but they did it. And then it finally came down to like, okay, I'm doing this. Are you guys in or not? And they were totally in because they wanted to support me and be there. And then, yeah. And we were expecting it to be forever. And just one day I got up before we went to get ready for dinner because we were going out to dinner with friends and my water broke. And I was like, oh, okay, this is happening. And as soon as my water broke, I had about 15 minutes of chill. And then the contractions hit like 2 minutes apart and they never stopped. It was like, and we're going. And looking back, I think that I was in labor on Friday at work, but I was busy. And because I remember I went to the bathroom and I felt terrible and I like threw up and I was like, oh, I feel terrible. And I left the bathroom and my friend was at the door and she's like, are you sure you're fine? Like, do you need to go home? I was like, I'm fine. I'm fine. So I like finished the day. And then my body turned it off because I was exhausted. And I literally like slept and I felt energy again on Saturday night. And then I went into labor.
That's an interesting theme. That was similar with me. I gave birth on Saturday, but Thursday morning, I was so tired. I couldn't even go to self-mastery class.
Because you were so tired.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then you didn't go into labor then until later. I think the body knows like when you're not ready. Like I was too tired. If I had gone and kept being in labor Friday night, I think my story would be very different. I would be exhausted.
Interesting. Yeah. I didn't get into like really, active labor until 24 hours later.
Yeah. So interesting. Yeah. Who knows? I think the babies know, the body knows. Anyway, so my water broke and I told my husband, and we texted my mom, and I knew it was my water. It was very obvious. I wasn't like, did I pee? No, it was clear. It was clearly my water. And then it just like kept gushing out. And I told my midwife, and I told my husband to go to the store and get snacks and food because we didn't have any. I was planning on doing it and I wasn't ready. But the weekend prior, I had asked my mom to come over and clean my entire apartment and mop the floor, which is so not, I would never ask my mom to mop my floor. So I should have known. But anyways, the apartment was spotless, but we didn't have any food. So I sent my husband to the store. And I also wanted to like be alone because I just wanted to be alone in the beginning. Like I didn't want him there. I wanted to be in the bathroom alone because I got really bad diarrhea, which was very helpful for labor because like everything was gone by the time I started in labor. I just had I would just get in the shower and then on the toilet and in the shower and on the toilet.
Wow.
And then it stopped. And by the time it stopped, I ran a bath to get in the bath as my husband was still gone. And I was like, man, I need to slow this down or something because I'm going to need him here because this is really hard to cope now. And maybe that was like 7:38. And I told him, I was like, I need you to come back. And then I wanted him there. So it was like, at first I was like, get away from me. And then I wanted him back. And I remembered a strange thing was my midwife packet. And I have so much so much gratitude for the care that I received. And I also have things that I have some criticisms of it because I felt like there was like an interesting dynamic. So the packet had said like required supplies were like healthy snacks for the midwives to eat. So my biggest stress going into labor was that I didn't have enough food for like the midwives. Because there is this strange dynamic. I think it's different than traditional birth support or birth keepers. Like we are taught in the school, right? Like you show up and take care of yourself. Like they should not worry about you. But my midwife has like a specific section on like
so
how to
funny.
care for your midwife.
What? Like requirements of food to have on
her.
Wow.
Yeah. Like it had a little section, and I'm sure that she wouldn't have minded if I didn't have anything, but it was very odd, right? And the other super interesting thing is I remember her telling me like, okay, first time mom, like you need to eat and sleep and you should be able to deal with these contractions. They should be like, I think she thought I was in early labor because I was very much in between contractions, able to talk to her. I would like snap back. I was fine. I was like, I'm good. And so she was like, oh, you're fine. And so as my husband came back and as my labor progressed, I felt like, no, this is not going to be short. And I even texted my mom and I said, I know all first time moms say this, but this is going to be fast. Like, be ready. And even my mom was like, okay, sure, honey. Right. Like, like they think that it's not ever going to be fast. But it was really funny because I did have this thing, like my midwife, she didn't trust me. She didn't like listen to what I was saying. She leaned more on her experience of first time moms in labor. So I continued to labor and things were getting really intense. And my husband had randomly ordered off Amazon at the end of our birth class a TENS unit. And he put it on my back and it was very helpful. So I was like on the bed on all fours and he would put the TENS unit on during the contraction and then take it off.
What is that? What is that? Like a heat pad?
It's like a thing that shakes your muscles. It like shakes.
Okay.
And it was actually really helpful. So he put that on and off. And that's the only like thing that I used for pain control. Cause I just wanted to be like on my hands and knees in the bed and just like whatever. But so then I was like throwing up and it was like midnight at this point. And he kept telling the midwife how things were progressing. And she was like, oh, you're probably early labor. And I was like, I'm not. And the only thing making me doubt myself was her. in her voice saying like, and I did have some moments thinking like, I must not be coping well, because if this is early labor, I'm not going to make it. And then I just decided to stop worrying about what she was saying and what they were like, I was like, I'm going to forget about her. And hopefully she doesn't make it. Like, I'm literally just going to forget about her, and I'm going to be tough and like get through this and whatever. So once I did that, I was able to trust, because it was like her voice saying, and I remembered like Yolanda's voice. I think it's her on the affirmations from Free Birth Society, saying like, when it feels too intense or like you feel like you can't do it, your baby's almost here. And I was like, my baby's almost here. And
Yeah.
she doesn't know what she's talking about. So I just like forgot about her. And then I was, throwing up on the bed, and it was really hard. And so my husband texted my mom, and she came about an hour later. He said it was exactly 45 minutes. I didn't realize how overwhelmed he was feeling. He's like, she took 45 minutes to get there. And I was like counting the seconds. And she's like, why don't you get in the tub again? And I got in the tub again, and that helped ease the pain. And it really felt good to be in the tub, but I had to be on my hands and knees or I was like crazy, and the lights had to be off or I
Did you make sure the Airbnb you were looking for had a tub?
Yeah.
Okay.
But the midwife was supposed to bring a big birth tub. Like, I planned a water birth, and she had a big tub, and I was really excited about that. But she thought that I was in too early of labor to bring the tub, and she wanted to get some sleep, so she didn't bring it. And I was like, that was a bummer, because the little tub I was in, it's okay, it worked out great. But I was in like a tiny apartment bathtub, so it was like not big, but it was enough relief, like having the shower and the tub. And then I remember my mom was like sitting in the bathroom with me, and she was like, do you want to get on the birth ball and bounce? And that's when I realized, I was like, we're not on the same page. I was like, give me your hand. I bet you can feel his hair. And I like put her hand down there, and I showed her that like he was coming. Like, I was like, that's him. And she's like, oh.
Did you keep touching down there to feel?
Maybe 3 times.
Oh.
Just, I felt like when she said that, I knew his head was there. So I was like, no, Mom. And then I showed her that you could feel his hair, and I could feel his hair. And I was like, I can't bounce. I'm going to smush his head. And I didn't realize this, but I know they were like texting the midwife, like kind of freaking out at this point. They were even texting her assistant, because they're like, you guys aren't here and you're not like listening. Like, this baby is coming. And then I do remember at one point I was in the tub. It was dark. They had a flashlight, because when they turned on the lights, I screamed at them. I was like, turn off the lights. And I said to them, I was like, this baby's coming. He has a lot of hair, and I need you now. Put down the phone. And they were like, and they both snapped out of it though. And they came over, and they were here, and I knew he was about to come. And my mom, I was just like, I need you to help me squat. And she helped me squat, because the tub was like tiny. And so my husband held the flashlight and the like water on my back. And then she caught him. I was like, he's coming. You need to catch him. And I didn't really push. There were a few contractions that I very clearly felt the difference. Like, after transition, all of a sudden the world stopped. Everything slowed down. And I like woke up, and I just knew exactly what was happening. And I kept telling them, they were so worried. And I remember I kept telling them, the baby's okay. The baby's okay. I know it. Like, I was so sure. Like, they could have told me he had no heartbeat, and I'd be like, no, he's fine. Like, I knew he was fine. And that was really cool. Did you get to experience that at all? Did you have like this moment of like extreme clarity?
At what point of what
Like,
though?
right before he came out, like after transition. During transition, I was like just making it through.
Yeah.
And then I was like fully there. I was like, he's totally fine.
I feel like, yeah, I felt like I was there the whole time, because I kept telling Cody, like, okay, give me my water. Okay. And like,
yeah,
like
like
next.
you knew,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, in between contractions, like you knew that the baby was fine.
Yeah.
And my husband said this really confused him, because in the birth class, the traditional birth class we took, they had told him I would be confused and like unable to help myself when the baby was close. And he's like, you never had that. I was like, yeah, of course I wouldn't, because that's ridiculous. Yeah, you're confused because you're in the hospital, popped up on drugs and like taking nitrous. Of course the women are confused. But I did not have that. I was like not confused at all. So out he comes flying as I squat, and my mom was the first one to grab him. So she like grabbed him and passed him up to me. And then she was like very stressed that he was there and the midwife wasn't there. I think she got responsible because, I'm her daughter, and it's like she's like, someone else needs to take responsibility for this.
Mm.
But it was fine. He was just on my chest and I kept telling them he was fine. And the midwife assistant came in like 10 minutes later. And this was shockingly disruptive. So they came in and they turned on all the lights because they wanted to see the baby breathing. And I have like a photo. The photo that my mom took right after is when the midwife assistant came over. In so many ways, she was great. Like she didn't like stick on gloves and rub him with weird things or anything. She just like took her hands and her stethoscope and listened. So you can see the photo of him like on my chest and she's like has her hand in the stethoscope. But that was really disruptive. The lights coming on and everyone running in and like touching the baby. And I just remember I was telling them like, he's fine, he's fine, he's fine. But they like had to hear his heartbeat. They like couldn't. It was so weird. And he was just looking up at me trying to open his eyes, but the lights were so bright. I could see him, but I could see that he couldn't open his eyes. And then they got me out of the tub and like I sat on the toilet. And I do remember the midwife's assistant was there because the midwife wasn't there yet. And I stood up and like, I was in the bathtub and I just had a baby. So a lot of blood came out. And the midwife's assistant goes, "Oh, are you okay? That's a lot of blood." And I remember saying to her, "Duh, I just had a baby. I'm fine." I just like got out of the tub and sat on the toilet. And thank goodness that was my mindset because that could have really thrown me off, right? Like someone saying, "You're bleeding too much," or like, "That's a lot of blood." But I knew it was nothing. So I just told her it was nothing. And I was like, "I'm going to sit on the toilet now." And so the blood came out and I was okay.
Yeah. Where do you think that mentality came from?
She had like run in drinking her coffee in the middle of the night and she was not centered, right? So she ran into this scene.
Yeah.
And the midwife wasn't there. So she felt the entire weight of responsibility.
Yeah. Well, I meant your mentality.
Oh, mine?
Yeah.
I think I had to go through so much like trusting my body and that I knew that I knew my baby was okay before labor. And then in labor, I was just so sure he was fine and that I was fine. There was no doubt in my mind. At that point, there was no doubt. I'd been through all the fears in pregnancy. Yeah. And I like, yeah, I had done like enough of the exploration. I was fine.
Yeah. And we know that blood in water looks like a lot, but it's not. I mean, you do that to like a mug, like one drop of food coloring.
I was shocked by this, that she said that. I was really surprised because to me, in my mind, I had like what you call like a butter birth, like smooth, like really fast, no issues. But so they put me on the toilet. I sat there for a while, snuggled him up. And then they suggested I move to the bed, which was nice because it was getting kind of like I was cold and it was nice to be in the warm bed, and they helped me in the bed. And then we kind of like waited for the placenta. And this was like the least pleasant part because the midwife has arrived at this point and everyone was just kind of like staring at me, like waiting for the placenta. And I felt stressed and I was like, "Oh, okay, the placenta's not coming." And my mom was stressed out. So she's like, "Do you have Pitocin? Can you give her the Pitocin?" And I was really proud of my husband because I had prepped him before. And I was like, "I don't want it unless I'm like unconscious bleeding out in the ambulance." And I was like, "If there's a discussion, it's not an emergency." So he just very calmly, and I think there's something very amazing about this, like kind of like calm masculine energy that in the space that can be very helpful. So he just very calmly was like, "She's not bleeding, right? Do you think we could wait, Kelly, the midwife?" And she's like, "Yeah, we can wait," which helped because my mom was like, has this huge presence, my mother. And so she can easily take over a room and influence what happens. So that was great because she's like, "Oh, we wait." And then I just remember thinking, okay, you need to close your eyes and let go of this because this needs to end or you're going to end up with Pitocin. So I did close my eyes and I thought like, let go, let go, let go. And the placenta came and it was done. And then everyone relaxed. But that was a stressful moment. And this was very much my choice. I chose to hire midwives largely because I wanted help with the after the baby came, because I thought, I know I can handle the birth, but if something goes wrong after, I want someone there to help, like with the baby and me, and to see what happens. So that is how it played out, right? That's when I needed them the most, quote unquote, because they were like all there waiting to fulfill their role of helper, which is why I had hired them. But it was fine. So I ended up not getting any Pitocin. and we just nursed and snuggled.
So when you have your appointments with the medical midwives, is there like a game plan? Like, and then after birth, this is what we're going to do to birth your placenta. Like, is there like a game plan on what happens?
We actually didn't. No. So I think they start those conversations like around 38 weeks, and I went into labor at 38 and 1. So the next appointment, we were supposed to like have those discussions more, and we didn't. We did have a discussion about that she like brings Pitocin, and I just said like I really don't want that unless there's a true emergency. And she said she was fine with that choice. So she's like, okay, no problem. I'm not sure how it would have played out if she actually arrived for the labor. I don't know how that would have gone. It might have been different than if it was just, because it ended up being just unassisted with my husband and my mom. But yeah, you do talk about it and they ask your preference. And my midwife, again, I chose her not because I had this amazing spiritual connection, but just because every time I said no, she respected it. So I imagined that if I said no in birth, she would respect it.
Yeah. And so when you said your placenta just came out, did you squat into a bowl? Did you do a bear down?
I wish I had squatted into a bowl. I hadn't taken the school before I gave birth, and that's such a helpful suggestion because I was just laying on the bed and they were like waiting, and it was a very hard position to deliver my placenta in. It was like it wasn't comfortable. It was difficult, and I just kind of like closed my eyes and said, let go, let go, let go. And it came, but it was not a good position. That's such a good point. I was like laying down. I can't imagine giving birth to my baby in that position. That would have not worked for me. It was not great. I was just laying on the bed and it finally came out and it was fine. But the midwife's assistant had like put a little pressure at one point to see if it was off the wall, but just sitting there. But it didn't come when she did that. And it didn't hurt. It was very gentle how she pulled on it. And then we waited and then it just eventually came. But yeah, I was laying down. Don't recommend that.
And so what do you do with the cord and placenta?
Oh, so then they offered to save it and I ended up not saving it. We were moving like a week to 2 weeks after that. And I felt very overwhelmed with this and like didn't know what decision I wanted to make. So I ended up having them dispose of it. I mean, we just threw it out and that was that. In retrospect, next time I'll definitely keep it. And I'm not sure what I'll do, but at minimum will bury it or do something to like close the birth versus just throwing it out. But I chose to just throw it out. I told them just throw it out, we're moving. That's it. And the other thing is I did have a labia tear. So midwives offer you sutures. I had one on each side. So I chose to suture one side and not the other. The sutures were the most painful part of the birth. I would not describe giving birth as painful. The sutures after it was like awful. I would not recommend it. And it was a labia tear, not a perineum. So I don't know if that's more painful or not, but she stitched one side, didn't stitch the other. I asked them like, what would you recommend? And she said, when you pee, it does really hurt if you don't stitch. And so I was like, okay, let's like stitch one side. And she did. And I did pee afterwards. And I do have to say it was accurate. The side that was like raw and open was very painful to pee. And the other side that they had stitched didn't hurt as much. And in the end, they both healed. And weirdly enough, the side with stitches, I can feel where the tear was. And the side without, I can no longer feel it. So it healed better without the stitches. I don't know if the one side was a worse tear because that's the one they chose to stitch. Maybe that explains it. But just like my experience with the suturing, because I know some women having a free birth wonder, like if I tear and I want stitches, what would it be like? So I would not have done it. Looking back, I would just skip that.
Did you look down with a mirror?
Yes, that's the other thing. They said like, they had a mirror and I was like, I want to see. And they're like, no, we don't recommend it. I was like, it's my butt. Give me the mirror. I was like, I definitely want to see what? And they let me see. So I looked and yeah, it looked like torn, but I figured I would heal. But funny that they did not want to show me. They thought that I shouldn't see. Weird.
I've heard another, I forgot who it was, but they said my vagina probably didn't heal as good or whatever because she saw it. She looked at it. So I don't know if it's like a superstition.
Interesting. Yeah. No, for me, I felt like I wanted to know what was going on with my body because what if I didn't look? How am I supposed to check it later? Like, what if I want to look later and see if it's okay? Um, yeah, so I looked and it didn't bother me in the least. I was like, okay, great. Like, it will heal, whatever. Plus, you're on that like baby high. You have your baby and you're snuggling and you have all the oxytocin. So you have like this, you definitely have this natural pain relief and positive outlook, which is good.
And so do you clamp the cord?
No, we waited for a really long time. And then eventually it was like totally pulseless and white. And I was wanting to get up. I wanted to get up and like wash off and get a shower. So then we cut and clamped and they helped me get a shower. Well, they just like stood in the bathroom to make sure I didn't faint while my husband just snuggled the baby. And then I came back to bed after my shower and relaxed. And I did really like being able to get up and get a shower. And after the placenta came, the midwife team was very sweet. And they like helped me into bed and snuggled me up with my baby and brought me food and helped clean up the entire apartment. So having the like wiser women there to do that was so nice, like just a luxury. They just like treat you like a princess and like clean everything in your house. And it was amazing. So it looked like I'd never given birth by the time I got up to go to the shower. It was like totally clean. It was really nice.
And now how does postpartum look like for you?
So we just stayed. So I had planned, we had to move in 2 weeks and I thought my baby wouldn't come until 40 weeks. So I'd arranged for my mom to come stay with me for a month. So I did the traditional, well, like 40 days. I'd planned the true postpartum 40 days to have her come. So we had 2 weeks there and she came in and out. And then when we moved at 2 weeks, which I don't recommend, I had like no symptoms recovery until we moved. And then the car ride and the move was very stressful. It was at the time what I chose because it felt essential. But we moved for my husband's job and he was working remotely and they're like, you have to move now. So we came 2 weeks later and we moved. And then I got hemorrhoids and I had those for a couple of weeks after the move. And prior
Wait,
to that,
you were in Virginia. You were in Virginia and then you drove to Charlotte.
Yeah. So
how long is that drive?
It's only 4.5 hours.
Okay.
And with a newborn, it took us forever. Like 8. Because he wanted to eat and cuddle and it was awful. He was like screaming and we were trying to use the bottle because I didn't have any way to nurse him while driving. I was trying to nurse while driving, but I was still recovering. So it was like, wouldn't work. Man,
you and your husband were in 2 separate cars or were you guys in the same car?
No, my mom came. So we were in the car and then she was in the other car and we drove down. And then after that, postpartum was very nice. My mom took care of me. She cooked for me. I slept. My husband took care of some of the other stuff and we just like laid low for 40 days and otherwise no regrets. The only thing after birth and postpartum that I did that I didn't realize that my medical like training kicked in and I kicked out of my brain that knew what to do. I mean, I kicked out of like my inner knowing and I went back to like this NICU mentality. After the midwives left, I dressed my baby, put a hat on and wrapped the baby up like I was taught. And I put him in the DockATot. Have you ever seen those things?
Yeah.
Like next to the DockATot. And then I was like, okay, he's like, and I'll just like watch him and rest. And a couple hours later, all of a sudden I woke up and I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing? Check your baby. And I got him and he was so cold. He was way too cold. I could tell by his like skin. I didn't even need to take a temperature. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so dumb. And I like got him totally naked, stuck him on me and put like warm blankets on us. And of course he warmed right up. But this was a very interesting experience for me because if I was in the hospital and I had done this traditional care that I did because I had so much conditioning, they would have said my baby's cold. It would have been a workup and a whole thing, like probably an admission to a nursery, if not a NICU, because I stopped that physiological birth natural process that was happening. And I wrapped him and I dressed him and I put the hat and I put him in a crib.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the only thing postpartum that like sticks out in my mind as very interesting because I thought I was like doing the things you're supposed to do, but I wasn't listening to my gut. I was just doing that from my mind. And that was the one time that I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. Anyway, so we moved and postpartum was wonderful because I planned to have my mom and we did great. And then, yeah, he just nursed and breastfeeding was relatively easy for me. I had planned on having my mom for extra support to learn to breastfeed because she's really good at that stuff if needed, but he nursed like a champ from the beginning, which was awesome. I did have some of that like discomfort and a couple like painful latches when they're nursing for me every like when he was nursing like every hour and wouldn't get off, I was very sore. And then that passed and then it was totally fine.
I bought the Womanly Art of Breastfeeding by La Leche League. And even though I read
Awesome.
it, I didn't even know I had like scabs. I didn't know I had to, well, for Bjorn, I thought he would just know how to just latch. I didn't know I had to guide him like sandwich, and that helped a lot. I don't know if that's for
Yeah.
every baby, but I thought he would know what to do. But no, some babies need
No.
help. Yeah.
That a lot of them they do need help. Luckily, so my mom, before she had worked, like the hospital used to have a program where they sent nurses to your house after you had your baby to help you. So you didn't have to go into the doctor, which was amazing. And she did that. So I had gone with her since I was a teen and listened to her teaching moms how to breastfeed. So I had this knowledge just from absorbing it. And now I like do the postpartum stuff and I feel like I've been doing this like forever. But I don't. I'm really just cheating because I have her knowledge like in my bones and in my mind because I have watched her help like countless women breastfeed. So that gave me a huge advantage for breastfeeding because I didn't have to think about it. I just knew like, oh, he's not doing this. Like, let me try this. And so it was easy. As easy as it could be.
So what led you to wanting to do holistic postpartum support?
I just realized after watching births in the hospital and then having the experience of a truly undisturbed birth until before the placenta when the midwives arrived, and then having the postpartum support of my mom, I was like, something is wrong here. There is a whole nother reality of birth that I had never seen before. Like these complications, these fears, this trouble postpartum, these sick babies coming back into the hospital, not gaining weight. That just didn't happen in this world of like home and free birth. And to me, this was so amazing. This was like a whole nother world of like, this is not pathology. This is health. This is life. So then I did the RBK school, the Free Birth Society. And that was an amazing experience to have that other perspective, complete opposite of the neonatal intensive care unit. They are different worlds. They are different realities. So there are truths in both of them in what I've seen. And I started doing some birth work here with an unlicensed midwife and some postpartum support. And as you know, I have my son who's like a little over a year. And for me, the postpartum support, I really loved it. And it was an amazing way to support women. And it also worked better because the constant on call for birth for me was not a reality with the attachment parenting style that I chose. I wanted to be there to nurse him. I didn't want to be away from him, like having my husband give him a bottle at night because I was at a birth. And so that is, of course, very selfish because you do have to, that was my choice. It didn't work with the attachment parenting. So I have worked with a lot with women who are planning their free birth and they don't want any attendance. They just need some support. And then I was doing the postpartum support because there's something about actually walking with women, being there in person and supporting them that's amazing. But I still just sometimes come home and I can't even believe that it's like a job because it's so nice. You just like go and you just be with them and you help them breastfeed. And so much of the breastfeeding, I think, is just simply having a companion to help you and be like, it's okay, you're doing great, because it's lonely getting up at night when there's no other woman there to feed your baby and trying to figure out how to feed your baby. And you have like your husband who has never breastfed. He has no idea how to support you. He can bring you snacks and food. And so that's how I got into the postpartum support. And so far it's been like a great blessing, and it's amazing because I can schedule it with my family. So it's a really good fit right now.
I love it. And
I love it. It's so great.
I saw your website and you're serving what radius of
Charlotte, like Fort Mill, like the greater Charlotte area. And then of course the free birth clients are from wherever, but they, strangely enough, they do usually end up being in North Carolina. They just like want a free birth, but they're in North Carolina. So that's cool. But yes, I'm serving women in person postpartum support in like the greater Charlotte area.
So if you were to share 3 great resources or for a first time mom to prepare for her birth, what would you recommend?
I think that book, Labor Like a Goddess, definitely the hardest thing is for moms to get past that they need to plan for postpartum too, not just labor. So Labor Like a Goddess, carefully choose your birth team and set up postpartum support however you can, which, like you mentioned, you read The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding. I would recommend reading that, something if you plan on breastfeeding. And you don't have to hire a postpartum doula or spend money. There are plenty of ways to set up your support team. Like if you can plan for someone to cook for you. If someone offers a meal train, accept it. Plan your freezer meals. If no one can cook for you, then plan meals, put them in the freezer. I would highly recommend find some woman in your life that you trust to be with you for a minimum of a month, where they can come every day and check on you and make sure you're okay and help you learn to breastfeed and just provide that companionship. Because through providing companionship in postpartum, these ordinary tasks of breastfeeding and raising your baby, they are not praised in society. Sure, they say everyone has to breastfeed, but really you're praised to like bounce back and handle it all and like have visitors postpartum and post your baby on Instagram. This is not a reality. You need a woman there to just be with you and be like, this is life. And then it feels joyful when you have someone to share it with. When you're alone in your house, like feeding your baby every hour and overwhelmed, it's not joyful. It's like, what am I doing? So I would recommend get someone in your life to be with you. And if you can, if you don't have someone and you can afford to hire help, that's great. If you can't afford to hire help, do it in the other ways. Like ask your friends, ask your neighbors, set up your village. And
I
that's
love those. I love those suggestions. And I like how you said sharing the moments it makes it more joyful, because I didn't have that the first 2 to 3 weeks. Even though my husband was there, it was just different.
Yeah, like imagine if you had a woman coming over who had breastfed her baby and who knew about this just to sit with you.
Mm-hmm.
Be like, how are you doing? Can I pass you your tea? Let's make tea and talk about your birth story. Because sometimes I go over and all they want is to have me like sit with them while they nurse their baby and tell me how they gave birth. And at first I would feel useless. I'm like, can I do your dishes? Can I help you? Can I help you? But that is helping. It's like the companionship of just being there is making her postpartum a joyful experience instead of a lonely one.
Absolutely. Even just watching with someone. Oh, like, did you see him do that? Like,
it's like, he's so cute.
Yeah.
It's
simple.
so fun.
Yep.
It's so simple. It's like, it makes those things like simple things like such a joy. It's amazing work. I'm like, I love every moment of it. It's so great.
Aww.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Kaitlyn.
Yes. Thanks for having me.